When the landslide hit, Cathy and I fell together. My boyfriend picked up Cathy right in front of me and left. He left me there alone. Everyone rushed Cathy to the hospital. No one cared about me. When I was finally taken to the hospital, my boyfriend never visited me once. But when I stopped loving him, he cried, saying he loved me. During the landslide, I was standing still, but Cathy pulled me, and I fell down with her. Felix, looking anxious, picked up Cathy and left without even glancing at me. Honestly, compared to Cathy, I was hurt worse. A tree stopped us, but I was the unlucky one who hit it first. A branch pierced my foot. She just got a few scratches because I cushioned her fall. When Felix came down, I couldn't stop crying, but before I could say anything, he had left with Cathy. Not once did he look at me. I finally passed out when Lily and some park staff rescued me. I was in the hospital for a month. Lily cried every time she saw me. "I'm sorry, Joanna, it's my fault. I thought Felix would save you, so I foolishly followed them. When I brought people back, I only saw Felix putting a girl in the ambulance. I thought it was you, so I didn't think twice. I'm really sorry, Joanna. I should have paid more attention." I patted Lily's head to comfort her. It really wasn't her fault. I thought Felix would save me too. Even after he left with Cathy, I hoped he would send someone else to rescue me. Although the branch pierced my foot, luckily it didn't hit any bones. With some rest, it would heal. On my discharge day, Felix came to pick me up. He looked exhausted. He carefully carried me to the car like I was a precious treasure. But when I reached his house and saw Cathy, I felt my fingers clench a bit. I liked sticking with Felix, so even after moving out, I bought a house across from his, becoming his neighbor. Felix's house was full of people, all his friends. "Joanna, everyone is here to celebrate your discharge." Before he could finish, a sweet voice interrupted. "Felix, where do you keep your seasonings?" "I'll find them." "You won't be able to." Felix quickly went to the kitchen. "How do you know I can't find them?" Cathy sounded slightly annoyed. Felix's tone was not great, but had a closeness to it that outsiders couldn't interrupt. "Then find them if you can." "I don't believe you will." "I will." "I don't believe I can't." "Why do you two always bicker when you're together?" "Need any help? We'll lend a hand." Felix's friends went into the kitchen, and joyful laughter echoed from there. I looked around at the others playing video games beside me. Though there were many people, I had no one to talk to. I felt warmth at my feet. A beautiful white ragdoll cat was cuddling my foot. Lily gave me this ragdoll cat, but Felix always took care of it. Little princess can't even take care of herself, and she wants to take care of a cat. When I excitedly said I wanted to care for it, Felix smiled and patted my head. "As long as there's Felix, even if you can't, he can." "Oh, you." I hugged the cat and spaced out until Cathy came over, carefully taking the cat from me. "Miss Joanna, go wash your hands. It's time to eat." She naturally took the cat, which didn't resist at all. It even snuggled into her arms, like it was showing affection. This cat wasn't usually affectionate. It took a long time for it to warm up to someone. Watching Cathy skillfully feed the cat, my numb heart suddenly felt a sharp pain. "I'm not hungry. I won't eat." I left Felix's house, and after a while, I heard Felix ringing my doorbell. "Joanna, why are you throwing a tantrum? We spent so long in the kitchen to celebrate your discharge. How could you leave without a word? You're being too much. Can't you be a bit more reasonable?" I ignored Felix until I realized my face was soaked with tears. The next day, after Felix went to work, I went to his house and took the cat. My friend adored cats, so giving it to her was a good choice. After giving the cat away, I packed my things and went back to my parents' home. The villa was luxurious, exuding elegance and sophistication everywhere. Felix and I were childhood sweethearts from early on. Everyone who knew Felix and me knew I was spoiled by him. From childhood to adulthood, my favorite person to stick with was Felix. My mom said that during a baby event, I ignored everything else and crawled straight to Felix, hugging him tightly. 3 years older than me, Felix sat there holding me, not daring to move. They said it was the first time they saw Felix, who usually had a stern face, looking so overwhelmed. People still talked about it. The first word I spoke was not mom or dad, but brother. My parents were jealous for a long time because of this. Coming back here always reminded me of Felix. My parents were puzzled by my sudden return, but mostly happy. After dinner, I went to my dad's study. "Tell me, you've been upset since you got home. Did something happen outside?" Without speaking, I placed a photo of Felix and Cathy in front of my dad. My dad was originally smiling while looking at me, but his face changed the moment he saw the two people in the photo who seemed a bit too close. My dad knows what kind of person Felix is. He knows Felix has always had something special for Cathy. That specialness used to belong only only to me. I've never tolerated anyone coveting what's mine, whether it's toys or clothes. Anything that can be taken from me, I don't care to keep. The reason I showed my dad this photo was simple. I didn't want Felix anymore. Dad was silent for a while, then he spoke. Joanna, how do you want to handle this? I want to call off the engagement, I replied. Felix and I got together after the college entrance exams. On the first day we were together, he brought his family to our house to propose an engagement. My dad hadn't been happy with him since then. We'll wait a few days until your uncle and the others come back, and then we'll go talk to their family about this, Dad said quietly after another moment of silence. All right, I responded calmly, but I couldn't stop the hot tears from falling onto my hands. It wasn't until my dad pried open my hand that I realized my nails had dug deep into my palm, leaving it a bloody mess. Later that night, Felix called me, sounding frantic. Joanna, Coco is missing. I didn't see it when I came back from work. I gave it away to someone. I interrupted Felix, and the next second, an angry girl's voice came through the phone. Joanna, that's too much. How could you give Coco away? Don't you think that's irresponsible? Joanna, you've had Coco for so long. Do you have no feelings for it at all? Why would you just give it away like that? I didn't know which hurt more. Cathy using Felix's phone to talk to me like this without him reacting, or realizing Cathy and Felix were still together at this hour. I hung up and rushed to the bathroom to throw up. After calming down, I blocked Felix on everything. Lily knew I was upset, so she took me out shopping to get me out of the house. I went with her, feeling uninterested, even though the weather was lovely. Lily has a thing for jewelry and likes to buy all sorts of expensive pieces. In the jewelry store, I couldn't help but marvel at the beautiful pieces, even though I've never lacked these sorts of things. I'm an only child and was always spoiled growing up. Besides my parents, Felix would also shower me with these jewelry gifts worth millions. My mom said Felix had been keen on buying me presents ever since we were children. The stuff Felix bought for me could fill several rooms. Still, I love looking at pretty jewelry. After shopping, Lily and I were happily heading home when someone stood in front of me. Joanna, what are you doing here? It was Cathy's brother, Harvey. I frowned, not wanting to deal with him. When I ignored him, he reached for my wrist. Lily quickly grabbed his hand. What do you think you're doing? She demanded, her face darkening. Harvey's hand stiffened, and he pulled away from Lily. Joanna, do you rich girls always look down on people? I greeted you, and you didn't even respond. I looked at Harvey coldly. Who do you think you are that I should respond to you? A store employee who had been watching couldn't help but laugh. This jewelry store was owned by my family, and I often came here with Lily, so the staff knew me well. Seeing I had no tolerance for Harvey, the staff quickly kicked him out. Humiliated in front of everyone, Harvey tried to get close to me again, but was firmly blocked by a bodyguard. Joanna, do you like insulting people like this? Harvey shouted. No wonder Felix says you're hard to deal with, that you're a spoiled princess. Who do you think you are? Lily glanced at me, worried. To reassure her, I patted her hand. Harvey, if it wasn't for Felix, do you think someone like you would even get to meet me? I've met Harvey a few times because of Cathy. He always acted like he looked down on me, thinking I was spoiled and hard to please. Even when I changed designer bags often, he thought I was wasting money. I really wonder what's going on in his head. I was born with a silver spoon in my mouth. I've been doted on my whole life. If I wanted to switch bags every day, or even lose one every day, I could afford it. Who does he think he is to criticize my life? Throw him out, I said flatly to the bodyguard, ignoring Harvey's shouts. And don't let him appear in front of me again. The bodyguard swiftly dragged Harvey out. He was cursing, but I didn't care. Later, at home, I received a message from an unknown number. It was a video. I opened it. Judging by the setting, it was filmed in a bar. The angle was hidden, likely from a camera. Still, it didn't matter. I could clearly see Felix in the video. Felix, was that Joanna calling? Why didn't you answer? Cathy was sitting close to Felix. I don't want to deal with her. She's so childish. It'd be better if she were half as sensible as you, Felix said, his voice as cold and distant as ever. He had a nice voice. There was a time when I had trouble sleeping, and no matter how busy Felix was, he would call me every night at bedtime to soothe me to sleep before continuing his work, even when he was busiest after taking over his family's company. What was once honey to my ears now felt like a dagger dipped in poison, stabbing me in the heart. I have no clue how I got back to my room. I went crazy and smashed everything Felix had ever given me into pieces. It wasn't until my mom held me, crying, that I realized I had cuts all over my body, still bleeding. I hugged my mom, but I couldn't make a sound. When I was little, my parents were always busy, so they left me with Felix. In a way, Felix raised me. He knew everything I liked and disliked. I was picky about food, but I'd eat anything Felix asked me to, even if I made a face. Felix taught me how to write, helped me with homework. Felix loved me for so many years, but he also hurt me the most. Felix's parents came back quickly. My parents took me to Felix's house. What surprised me was that Felix also showed up. And not just him, Cathy was with him too. Felix seemed surprised to see my family there. He looked unusually flustered, his voice noticeably urgent. "Joanna, uncle, aunt, please don't misunderstand. I'm just here with Felix to pick up some documents." Cathy spoke up, but nobody paid her any attention. Felix hurried over to me and tried to take my hand, but I pulled away. He immediately knelt beside me, looking at me carefully. I didn't look at him. Instead, I turned to his parents. "As we discussed earlier, can we cancel my engagement with Felix?" "What cancellation? Joanna, are you serious? Don't throw a tantrum. This isn't something to joke about." Felix grabbed my hand tightly, hurting me. "Okay," his father sighed helplessly. The moment he spoke, Felix jumped up emotionally. "Okay, no way. I don't agree. Joanna, please, let's not joke about this. I can't handle it." "Felix, what are you doing? If the engagement is cancelled, it's cancelled. Stop making a fuss." His father, furious, threw his wine glass at Felix. Using full force, the glass hit Felix's head, making it bleed. Instinctively, Felix covered the wound. "Joanna, don't look, it'll scare you. I've always been afraid of blood." So Felix was meticulous about these things. I finally looked at him, but didn't say a word. I stood up and walked out with my parents. Felix tried to follow, but his father stopped him. I couldn't hear what they said. Back home, my mom said she would sleep with me tonight. My dad's face fell visibly. Smirking, I made a silly face at my dad, then closed my eyes, holding my mom's arm. When my mom's breath evened out, I opened my eyes. Since the accident, I often had bouts of insomnia. Soon, it started raining heavily with thunder. The room was well insulated, so the thunder wasn't too loud. After a while, I stepped onto the balcony and surprisingly saw Felix downstairs. I was afraid of thunder. As a child, I'd cry for Felix whenever it thundered. If he was staying over, I'd take the doll he gave me and go to him. Felix would kindly tuck me in, turn on a small light, and tell me stories. He'd only sleep after I did. When I was older, it wasn't appropriate to sleep together, so he'd call or stay by my bedside, talking to me. A clap of thunder snapped me out of my thoughts. As if sensing something, Felix looked up, but the glass was one way, so he couldn't see me. I couldn't look at him anymore. I sat down, hugging my knees, lost in memories. Felix was a big part of my life. For over 20 years, he was always in my memories. My parents were always busy. They spent less time with me than Felix did. If my parents were busy during parent-teacher conferences, Felix would go. Felix and I went to the same school for elementary and middle school. So in elementary, I dreaded meeting my teachers on the way home with Felix. If I was naughty, they'd tell Felix, who would then make me copy texts. Halfway through, I'd cry, and Felix would always go easy on me. Copying texts was our family's way of punishing me, although Felix mostly did it for me. Whenever I had to copy texts, Felix would bring lots of food. He'd dry my tears, make me eat while he copied for me. "Felix, your handwriting is too good. Make it worse, or Dad will notice." "I know, but you need to practice more." Whenever my dad checked my copied texts, he'd hesitate, because Felix did most of it. Our handwritings were worlds apart. It was obvious. Eventually, Dad realized that punishing me meant punishing Felix, so he started going easy on me. I didn't become better behaved, but Felix's handwriting got even prettier. After my dad realized punishment didn't work on me, he stopped making me copy texts. Felix adopted this tactic later. Our teenage years together were our happiest times. I did notice Felix's changes later on. Cathy got into college thanks to my financial support. She was truly exceptional. We didn't share the same major, but I heard about her from my roommates. She was really outstanding, despite her tough circumstances, excelling in her studies. I first heard about her financial struggles through others, so I helped her. I didn't think much about it until she thanked me in person. I saw Felix's eyes light up when he saw her. Back then, Cathy was like a resilient pine tree, full of an unyielding spirit. I don't think Felix had ever met a girl like her, because in our circle, everyone had a wealthy background. Nobody ever worried about money. Cathy was delicate yet strong. She didn't need Felix to be overly cautious with her. She was understanding, kind, and graceful, very different from my own difficult, spoiled personality. When I opened my eyes again, I saw my mom wrapping us both in a blanket. Mom and I, heads together, had fallen asleep. I laughed softly and gently touched my mom's hand. She woke up quickly. Sleeping like this is really uncomfortable. Let's get up and have breakfast. Mom didn't say anything. I laughed and snuggled against her shoulder. Okay. As we got dressed and were about to leave, we saw Felix. He looked terrible. Probably because he'd been out in the rain all night. His face was pale, without a hint of color. Joanna, why didn't you answer my calls yesterday? Were you scared of the thunder? Did you sleep well last night? I looked at Felix calmly. Felix, I'm not a kid. Being scared of thunder was a childhood thing. I used to use that as an excuse to talk to you more, to hear your voice. Now there's no need. Why would I say I'm scared of thunder? Felix, knowing me well, understood what I meant. I had really moved on from him. Felix's face turned even paler, and he looked like he might collapse. His eyes were red and piercing. I instinctively turned my head and started to walk away. Joanna, please. I was wrong. I really was. Felix's hands were shaking as he held mine, and warm droplets fell on my hand. I was startled. It was the first time I'd seen Felix cry, but I still pulled my hand away. Felix, you know my personality. I won't let anyone make me suffer. Felix sobbed, choking on his words, his pale lips trembling, but unable to speak. Felix, this is it for us. I left without looking back at Felix. The next time I heard his name was a month later. Felix's mom called me. Joanna, could you come see Felix? He hasn't eaten or drunk anything in a while. After thinking for a moment, I agreed to visit Felix, because his mom had always been very kind to me, and I didn't want to refuse her. When I arrived at the hospital, Felix's mom hugged me. Just seeing him is enough. I won't ask for more. I know he did wrong, and I'm sorry, Joanna, for the hurt he caused you. I patted her hand comfortingly, softly assuring her until she calmed down. Then I went to Felix's room. As soon as I walked in, I saw Felix on the bed. He had lost a lot of weight. His once prominent knuckles and veins now stood out sharply. I sighed as I looked at the 4 in his hand. Sensing my presence, his closed eyes opened. His previously lifeless eyes suddenly lit up. Joanna. Felix sat up hastily, grabbing my hand tightly. He stared at me unblinkingly, as if afraid I would vanish in the next second. Joanna, am I dreaming? You came to see me. Joanna, do I look terrible like this? Did I scare you? This is the longest you've ignored me. I missed you so much I thought I'd go crazy. His voice was strained, like an old machine, thick with an unnatural stiffness, probably because he hadn't spoken in so long. I looked at the red veins in his eyes and the dark circles under them, tensed up for a moment, then found a chair to sit down. Felix, is being with me exhausting? Felix froze at my words, pulling his lips into a smile that looked worse than a cry. No, Joanna, I've never thought that. Felix gripped my hand tightly, lowering his head. Felix was always proud. He never bowed to anyone or anything except me. You know, I can't lie to you, and you can't lie to me. We've been intertwined since birth. Over these 20-some years, no one knows each other better than Felix and I. I knew he didn't have feelings for Cathy, and didn't like her. But being around Cathy relaxed him. Felix found being with me exhausting, while with Cathy, he felt at ease. This realization crushed me more than when Felix chose to take Cathy off the hillside instead of me. Joanna, no, it's not like that. Really, it's not. Believe me, I just love you too much. I'm so scared. Scared I'm not good enough. Scared you'd see my bad side and stop loving me. The mere thought of that possibility drives me insane. Felix's voice grew more desperate, his grip tightening around me, sounding both pained and hopeless. I love you too much, Joanna. I can't live without you. Please, forgive me. I sighed and pushed him away. Focus on getting better. Your mom and dad are really worried about you. Joanna, I'll listen. I'll get better. Just don't ignore me. Ignoring Felix, I walked out of the room and saw his mom sitting on a nearby bench. We found a place to sit together. She held my hand, lost in thought. I heard from your mom that you've been taking sleeping pills. Is it because of Felix? I nodded. After realizing Felix's feelings for Cathy, I had many sleepless nights. Lately, he's been drinking all the time, calling your name when he's drunk. He's been acting crazy, teetering on the edge every day. As a child, he rarely cried. I barely saw him cry then. After you came around, he started seeing himself as an older brother all the time. Said he wanted to be a role model for you. He stopped crying altogether, but lately, I often hear soft sobbing from his room. Were you feeling that upset too? Hearing Felix's mom's gentle words, I thought back to when I first noticed something was off with Felix and Cathy. Back then, it felt like my world was falling apart. I couldn't understand why Felix would be interested in someone else. I figured maybe he got tired of being with me for so long. So he started liking someone completely different. Even though he loved me, he gave up on me many times just to chase that thrill. But then, after he lost me for good, he acted all regretful. How pathetic. If I didn't love him so much, I might not have cared. I know some couples who got together for the sake of an arranged marriage. They live respectfully, but don't interfere with each other's lives. After that, I never went to see Felix again. Instead, I threw myself into my busy work. Most of the time, I was so busy I barely had time to sleep, but my days were full. I only had a moment of clarity when Cathy showed up in front of me again. It had been a long time since I thought about her and Felix. Cathy looked awful, dark circles under her eyes. She stopped me on my way home from work. Honestly, I didn't want to deal with her, but she wouldn't leave until I agreed to talk. You have everything. Why won't you just let Felix go? Cathy glared at me, her voice shrill with emotion. Did you make my roommate bring you up to ask me for help? Just to get close to Felix? When I noticed Cathy and Felix were getting cozy, I got suspicious. Why would my roommate randomly bring up Cathy in front of me, always mentioning her family situation? My mom has always been into charities, helping underprivileged students, so I followed her lead. When I sponsored Cathy, I didn't think much of it. Her family really wasn't well off. It wasn't until I was chatting with my old university roommate group that things clicked. I told them Felix and I broke up, and one of them messaged me privately. She asked if I broke up with Felix because of Cathy. I was surprised she thought of Cathy since I never said why we broke up. Actually, back then, Cathy asked me to see if you could sponsor her. We were high school classmates, so I mentioned it to you. Later, I found out her family was poor, sure, but she actually had money for school. Cathy's from a single-parent family. Her mom had to raise her and her brother alone, but her dad still sent money for living expenses each month, which her mom gambled away. Cathy's dad had already saved up school funds for her and her brother, money he gave directly to them, not to her mom. I only found out about this after going home post-graduation. In freshman year, I saw a picture of Felix on Cathy's phone, but I didn't think much of it. I stared at her messages for a long time, feeling a mix of humor and bitterness. Cathy suddenly laughed, looking a bit mad. Yes, I used you to get close to Felix. He only had eyes for you. I liked him for years, but he wouldn't even look at me. I was so jealous I went crazy. Why did he only see you? He only remembered my name because of you. Her words left me stunned. You've liked Felix for a long time. You knew him before. I met Felix in high school during a competition. I've liked him ever since. If only you weren't here. Before I could react, someone covered my mouth and nose from behind. When I came to, I was tied to a pier at the beach. The tide was rising, and the water was already up to my waist. Cathy is insane. I struggled like mad, but the ropes were too tight. As the water started to cover my mouth and nose, I thought I saw Felix. When I woke up in the hospital, my parents were there, looking exhausted and grayer. I regretted using myself as bait to see what Cathy would do. If I had known, I would have ignored her, spared my parents from so much worry. Lily's eyes were red from crying. She told me Cathy and her brother were in jail. When Cathy came to me, I tipped Lily off, and she smartly recorded our call. With my parents determined to make Cathy pay, Cathy and Harvey's jail time was inevitable. Cathy had serious issues. She always had to get what she wanted, no matter the cost. In high school, she bullied another student with similar grades until they dropped out. I listened quietly, and after a long time, I spoke. What about Felix? Lily fell silent. I waited, watching her until she finally looked away. It was Felix who found you. By the time we got there, he had already saved you. His condition isn't good. Susan, who had been watching over Felix, left the room after she saw me. She asked a few concerned questions before giving us some alone time. Felix lay on the hospital bed with his eyes closed. He looked so thin. Lily said that Felix's chances of waking up were slim. I sat by Felix's bed and held his hand. Since the doctor said I could be discharged, I'd been visiting Felix every day. Most of the time, I just stared at him in a daze. Many times, I told him everything that happened to me that day. 3 months passed without me realizing it. Felix, wake up. I buried my face in the blanket beside his bed, feeling dejected. The next moment, I felt someone lightly touch my head. I looked at Felix in disbelief. He was looking at me gently. When Felix was discharged from the hospital, I didn't pick him up. Since he woke up, I started reducing my visits. So every time I did go, Felix would quietly complain that I didn't care about him. But whenever I tried to respond, he would change the subject, avoiding it. I knew he was worried I'd get mad and stop visiting him forever. Once, when I was resting my eyes, Felix thought I was asleep. He carefully slipped a ring onto my ring finger and kissed it with deep reverence. "Joanna, I love you," he whispered. Felix's lips were a bit cold. When they touched my hand, I held my breath, but luckily, he didn't notice. He quickly put the ring away and acted like nothing happened when I woke up. When Felix was discharged, I was getting ready to move abroad. He called me when I got to the airport. I guessed Susan had told him. For a long while, Felix said nothing on the phone. I waited patiently. When the announcement started calling for boarding, Felix finally spoke in a hoarse voice. "I'm sorry." I smiled calmly. "Goodbye, Felix." I couldn't bring myself to forget everything that had happened. From the moment a third person could easily come into our relationship, I had already killed the Joanna who once loved Felix deeply. From now on, no matter how far I travel, there won't be Felix anymore.